Hi guys, welcome back to the Card Combo Show, episode 72 with me, Chocobilly, where we look at the weird and wonderful card combinations in the Final Fantasy TCG, and this week I'm looking at cards that either draw you cards, or cards that interact with the drawing you cards. So this week I'm looking at Mog 6 from Opus 15, Sakura from Opus 10, Romaa Mihgo from Opus 15, Werei, I don't know, from Opus 15, and Suzuhisa from Opus 10. So first up we have Mog 6 from Opus 15. When Mog 6 enters the field, you may pay a crystal. When you do so, draw 2 cards, then discard 1 card from your hand. At the end of each of your turns, choose up to 1 forward other than Mog 6. During this turn, if you have drawn 4 or more cards, return it to its owner's hand. If you have drawn 6 or more cards, put it into the break zone instead. So, yeah, pretty decent to be honest, and you know, just a nice way to be able to draw your cards. And then he's also got the S ability of an S and 1 water, sorry. Draw 2 cards, you can only use this ability once per turn. So, just nice to be able to get more cards to hand, really. So something like Horns, hilarious, because Mog has at the end of each of your turns, choose up to 1 forward other than Mog 6 ability, and if you've done 4, then that means you get to bounce something. If you've done 6, then you get to break something. Now, that does include drawing for turn. So if you play Mog in your main phase 1, and then you draw 2 cards, get to the end of your turn, you get to bounce something because you drew 2 at the beginning of your main phase, and then you get to draw 2 from Mog. But something like Horn is pretty funny because obviously he works nicely with Mog because it's a Moogle. But 2 Water and Dull, draw 1 card for each job Moogle you control. Then place as many cards as drawn from your hand at the bottom of your deck in any order. Now, you are putting cards back into your deck, but ultimately you're still drawing them. So that means that you can effectively, let's say you've got Mog, Horn, Artemisian, you know, all these other cards. I mean, there's buttloads of Moogles in Water, not to mention probably Water Ice where there's the most. But yeah, just a really easy way to be able to get lots of Moogles onto the field. Use Horn to draw, I don't know, 6 to your hand and then put 6 back into your deck. It could be the same 6 cards, it doesn't really matter. The point is that you're getting Mog 6's effect off effectively so that you can break something every turn using Mog. Lakshmi, Lady of the Bliss. So, as I mentioned before, you are guaranteed 2 cards. So realistically, with Mog on the field, to even get a bounce off, all you need to do is draw 2 cards a turn to make sure that Mog is bouncing something. Now, both Lakshmi and Mog have triggers at the end of the turn, but if you trigger Mog first and then Lakshmi will resolve first, which will then draw you a card, and then Mog will see that you've drawn a card from Lakshmi, and if you have also drawn another card some other way, and you've got to 4 or 6, that will then allow Mog to either bounce or break something. But even though it is at the end of the turn, Lakshmi coming first means that you have drawn the card once Mog comes to resolve, so it still works nicely. Then you got Poo Poo. If you've played Mog this turn, then it's probably not the best turn to play Poo Poo, but Poo Poo's good. Can't believe I'm saying those words. Because of the way it's formatted. It says discard 1 card, then draw 2 cards. If you were to play Poo Poo with no cards in hand, it means that you've got no cards to discard, but then you get to draw 2. So unlike some other cards like Merlewhip, for example, where you draw 2 cards and discard 1, you will always be discarding. But with Poo Poo, you... I can't say, I'm such a juvenile, I'm sorry. You go to discard, you have no cards to discard, doesn't matter, it doesn't need to be a fulfilled prerequisite, it's just an effect of the card, and then you get to draw 2 cards for 1 CP, which is pretty good. And then, yeah, obviously with Mog, they're the 2 cards you need to be able to bounce something, or hopefully get you to getting to 6 to break something. Kusith, so, not the best card in the world. Dull and discard 3 cards, each of a different type, and put Kusith into the break zone, draw 4 cards. You are putting 4 cards into the break zone to do this, but it's still getting you the same amount of cards, or more cards to hand, effectively, which is not the worst thing. And you are ultimately going to be able to kill something with Mog as well, provided Mog actually, you know, stays on the field to the end of the turn. Because the worst thing about Mog is the fact that you can announce that you're going to your end phase, and then your opponent says, before you get there, I'm going to break Mog, and then basically everything you've done to set up his effect has been for nothing. Aside from, you know, drawing lots of cards, which is always good, but still, using something like Kusith, not the best, but still an interesting way to be able to get 4 cards to hand, which means that, you know, just using Kusith's ability and drawing at the beginning of your main phase means that you've hit Mog's prerequisite to be able to break something. Shinryu. So, just fantastic card. But at the beginning of main phase 1, during each of your turns, reveal the top card of your opponent's deck. If it's a forward, all the forwards opponent controls lose 7,000 power until the end of the turn. If it is not a forward, draw 2 cards. So, regardless of the effect you get, it's really, really good. But with Mog on the field, it means that you get to draw 2 cards. So you've actually drawn 4 cards at the beginning of your main phase. And then Mog's definitely going to be bouncing something regardless. And then if you can also, discard, or sorry, draw 2 more cards, you get to break something as well. And finally, Leviathan. So, yeah, you get to bounce something with Mog. That's perfectly fine. You get to minus AK something else. But what's good about Mog is that at the end of each of your turns, choose up to 1 forward other than Mog 6. That's the only restriction. So you can choose a forward you control as well. So you could work him alongside something like Vikings. So you can keep putting Layla back into your hand, keep on replaying her to draw Vikings out of your break zone. Obviously, Mog happens at the end of the turn. So if you are bouncing your own forwards, ultimately means you won't be able to play them until the following turn, unless they've got back attack. You could be running Tidus from Opus 10, 11, I can't remember now. But yeah, you can ultimately target your own things, which would put it back in your hand. Leviathan would see that, you get to minus 9k something. Not too shabby. Right, next we've got Sakura, a 2CP 5k lightning forward. When Sakura enters the field, if your opponent controls a damaged forward, draw 2 cards. No, this doesn't work with the old school Al-Cid, because Al-Cid brings in Sakura first. Oh look, Sakura's been brought in through Al-Cid, then deal 6k to something. But yeah, ultimately Sakura is a good way to generate you a couple of cards. So using something like Dancer, it basically just means that Sakura becomes a 3 CP forward to draw you 2 cards, which isn't the best, but it's also not the worst. And something that Lightning does lack is card draw. So having something like Sakura just come onto the field, draw you 2 cards, not too bad. Puck and Ewan. So let's say you've got a forward that's been dealt some damage. Maybe you attacked or something and your opponent blocked and that forward now has damage on it, or some other effect, whatever, it doesn't really matter. You can play Puck onto the field, and at damage 3 you get to play a 2 CP and a 1 CP forward from your break zone onto the field. What you'd want to do is stack it so Sakura comes in first and you get 2 cards, and then Ewan comes in and gets to break that forward. So you're really capitalizing on the fact that your opponent has a damaged forward. Obviously if you brought Ewan in first, that forward would die, then Sakura come in, there'd be no forward with damage and be kind of pointless. So yeah, always make sure that Sakura comes in first with this little combo. Then you've also got Vivi. So in this case, you'd want Vivi to come in first, because Puck would bring in Vivi. Vivi would deal at the very least 2k damage or something. That's perfectly fine. Then bring in Sakura, who will then see that a forward's got 2k damage on it, and you get to draw 2 cards. And then finally Viking. Maybe there's a forward that's already got some damage on it. You bring in, or you play Puck to bring in Viking and Sakura and draw 3 cards. Not too bad. Kuchaswell, yeah, I mean, the forwards need to be able to actually retain the damage on them, so if your opponent's got something like Minwoo, then ultimately it's going to be quite hard to just have that residual damage lying there. So making sure you've got Kuchaswell so that damage cannot be reduced to 0, then playing Sakura to get cards. Again, another way that is effectively making Sakura a 3 CP forward, but it's still getting those cards to hand, which might be something that you desperately need. Brynhilde. So choose a forward, deal at 5k. When it's put from the field to the break zone at this turn, draw 1 card. So maybe you play Brynhilde, do 5k to something, but you don't kill that forward. You then play Sakura, draw 2 cards to hand, and then you, I don't know, use Blaze, put Blaze into the break zone, deal 7k to that forward, that Brynhilde hit. You now get to draw a card from Brynhilde's effect as well, which isn't too bad. It means you've drawn 3 cards for effectively killing a forward. Dark Knight, just another way to be able to deal damage to all your opponent's forwards. Board damage is always nice, and you can kind of keep this in mono lightning as well, because Dark Knight only requires 1 dull of a lightning to be able to do 1000 damage to all your opponent's forwards. Obviously Dark Knight will take 2k as well, but the good thing about Dark Knight is actually that you can keep using Dark Knight's ability. You can use it 5 times if you really want to. Deal 5k to your opponent's board. It doesn't matter that Dark Knight dies, because the effect will still be there of dealing 1000 to all your forwards' opponents, or your opponent's forwards 5 times. Right, next we've got Romaa Mihgo. So when you draw a card, Romaa Mihgo gains 1000 power until the end of the turn. So you'll need Romaa to be on the field for a whole turn. So you play it, main phase 1, go around, your opponent's turn, your turn next. But at the beginning of your main phase, when you draw 2 cards, that again works for Romaa Mihgo, just like it does with Mog 6. So it means that so long as Romaa Mihgo survives at least a turn, it will effectively always be a 10k forward on your turn, which isn't too shabby. So Leon, yeah, ultimately, if you've got Leon on the field and Romaa Mihgo has been on the field long enough for you to sort of draw 2 cards, you can attack a Romaa Mihgo, which will then trigger Leon. Leon will draw you a card, which then puts Romaa Mihgo to being an 11k forward, which is quite nice. Now, if you've got other big forwards on the field as well, they could be attacking, drawing new cards through Leon. That makes Romaa even bigger, and then when Romaa attacks, it'll be like a 15k forward, which also draws you a card. Minerva. So, at the beginning of your main phase 1, select one of the 3 following actions. All forwards gain plus 3,000 power until the end of the turn. All characters opponent controls lose abilities until the end of the turn, or draw 1 card. So, I mean, realistically, you can give all your forwards plus 3,000 power, at which point, you know, what's the point of drawing for Romaa Mihgo? But sometimes that draw is more essential than actually giving all your forwards power, because it might not be a case that you actually want to be attacking or anything like that. You just need more consistency to hand your play summons to do things to break your opponent's stuff, and that's where Minerva comes in nice. But it also works because Romaa Mihgo does get a little bit bigger as well, so maybe Romaa is just that one forward that is going to attack. Again, maybe working alongside something like Leon, and Minerva works nicely as well because you can give plus 3k to all your forwards. Ultimately, it's just a nice card to have that versatility of being like, well, I'm going to draw something, or I'm going to buff my forwards, or just making all your opponent's forwards lose their abilities. No, sorry, all your opponent's characters lose their abilities. It's fantastic because making like all their backups lose that as well. Your opponent has to respond at that point. If they don't, it's all gone, just gone. So good. And Rosa, yeah, it's a not very much played card, but I actually kind of like it. Whenever a forward you control is chosen by your opponent's summon, you may draw a card. So your opponent basically has to weigh up the odds of maybe you're attacking with Romaa Mihgo at 10, and they're like, well, I'm going to cast a summon and target Romaa Mihgo, but that will draw a card will actually give Romaa Mihgo more power as well. I don't doubt at the end of the day that'll probably be something that'll kill Romaa anyway, but you know, this is more cards to your hand, and ultimately does make Romaa a little bit more of a threat. Belias. So, choose one forward until the end of the turn. It gains plus 1,000 power and first strike, and draw 1 card. If you receive 4, it also gains haste as well. Don't really care so much about the haste, but ultimately, by playing Belias on Romaa Mihgo, it actually means that he'll gain plus 2k. 1k from Belias, but 1k also from you drawing a card. Artemisian, much the same as Horn really, it's as many cards as you draw and then put back into your deck. But when Artemisian enters the field, place any number of cards from your hand at the bottom of your deck in any order, then draw the same number of cards. So you play Artemisian, put 4 at the bottom of your deck, draw 4 cards. Romaa Mihgo is now plus 4, not too bad. Garuda, Lady of the Vortex, or when a forward of 9,000 power or more, your opponent enters the field, draw 1 card. So it's just another nice way of your opponent having to consider the ramifications of them playing something big onto the field, gets you cards, and also makes your forward a little bit bigger. Rosa, discard 1 card, draw 1 card. Just a nice way to be able to mill yourself a little bit and hopefully give you better options, whilst also making Romaa a little bit bigger. Right, Werei, a 4 CP ice backup, with the text at the end of each of your turns. If your opponent has discarded a card from their hand due to your summons or abilities this turn, draw 1 card. I really like this card. I still need to make a deck based on it, but from what I've put in this video, it's probably going to be very similar to what I'm going to feature now. I've played against a deck with this card, and it looks like a lot of fun, if I'm perfectly honest. Something I didn't need is more draw mechanics, because your opponent already is at a deficit once you start making them discard. But to reward you by drawing more cards as well, oh, that's just horrible. Ice is already a disgusting element to play up against, so the fact that it's now going to start getting a massive draw mechanic as well, no. Anyway, Orphan, yeah, these guys are in the same set. Of course, they're meant to play together. Orphan, at the beginning of your at the beginning of your attack phase, during each of your turns, your opponent discards 1 card from their hand. So that basically means your opponent discards a card every turn with Orphan on the field, and then you also get to draw a card every turn. That's just really, really good. But if you combine that with Lakshmi and Mog 6, it means that you're also getting a guaranteed dull. Guaranteed dull? You ought to get a guaranteed dull. You ought to get a guaranteed bounce. So Orphan will trigger at the beginning of your attack phase. Your opponent discards a card. You go to the end of your turn. You stack it Mog 6 first, and then Lakshmi and Werei. Werei will trigger. You get to draw a card because your opponent discarded a card through Orphan. You then get to draw a card from Lakshmi, and then Mog will trigger, and because you draw 2 at the beginning of your turn, you draw 1 of Lakshmi, and then you draw 1 of Werei, you've already hit that prerequisite of just doing, drawing 4 cards in 1 turn. So you get to bounce something every turn. provided that Orphan, Mog, Lakshmi, and Werei all stay on the field. And to be honest, let's face it, once the Orphan comes down, I doubt he's going to be sticking around. But sometimes Ice is really good at locking down your opponent's field, and there's lots of summon cancellation as well. So, you know, if you get the right setup, your opponent will really struggle. And again, it's in water, so water's got some great protection as well. But yeah, with these guys in the field, every turn you will be drawing 4 cards, including your draw phase. So you will be guaranteed a bounce. If you're able to also, you know, draw 2 more cards elsewhere, you'll be getting a guaranteed break every turn. Not too bad. You could throw Horn in there as well, because Horn for one is a Moogle, so is Mog, so you'd be drawing 2 cards off of that and then putting 2 back into your deck, so it's not really milling yourself anymore. So you are actually going to get a guaranteed break off of that. It does require a fair amount of investment, but not too bad if you get to guaranteed break something every turn. Fistalis, another card that loves to draw. So when Fistalis enters the field or attacks, if your opponent has 3 cards or less in the hand, select one of the 2. If your opponent has no cards in the hand, select 2 of 2. And they are either choose 1 character, Dull and Freezer, or draw 1 card. So yeah, just a card that rewards you for making your opponent discard, which is something Werei does, but also you get to draw cards, and if you're drawing off of Fistalis and off of Werei as well, it means you're getting lots of cards to hand whilst your opponent's got nothing. Edward, another way to make your opponent reliably discard cards. He's not a great card. I mean, the fact he's 3 CP means he's kind of awkward to play and he's got no immediate reward, but if you can, every turn, use Edward to make your opponent discard a card. Whilst gaining a card, he immediately becomes a bit better. And ultimately, if you combine him with something like Orphan as well, when your opponent discards a card, you get to dull something out as well. Dulling and making your opponent discard and getting a card to hand for 2 CP and a dull is really not that bad. If you combine Edward with lots of backup reactivation as well, you can make your opponent discard so many times, dull out loads of forwards, and get a card to hand. Not too bad. Something I haven't mentioned yet is the fact that Werei, he says, at the end of each of your turns, if your opponent has discarded a card from hand due to your summons or abilities this turn, draw 1 card. You only get to draw 1 card regardless of how many times you've made your opponent discard a card, because it's just one effect of, have they discarded? Yes? Cool. Draw a card. It doesn't trigger for every single time you have made your opponent discard, unfortunately. Zed, this card, when he's dealt damage by a character, that character's control discards 1 card from his or her hand, and you can obviously buff him by paying 1 CP and ice. So he can just kind of sit there. Your opponent's like, well, I don't really want to attack, because then they discard regardless of whether or not Zed dies to an attack. I mean, obviously, if your opponent's got first strike, then Zed would die before he deals damage to something, so yeah. But ultimately, if Zed is dealt damage, it doesn't really matter. But even if Zed dies, he still gets you a card through Werei as well. So just having him sat there with your opponent not really wanting to get rid of him is kind of annoying. Obviously, there's a lot of just outright breaking, and you know, power reduction is a thing these days as well. So there's still some easy ways to get rid of him, but if you've got the protection online, so stuff like Luge or just Summoner to be able to cancel summons, he becomes a bit harder to kill, outright blocking and stuff like that. So, you know, always having that threat there of making your opponent have to discard a card when he takes damage, whilst also having the possibility of drawing a card from it is quite nasty for your opponent. If they're in fire and they see Zed, that's not great, because there's lots of little chip damage. Bard. When your opponent discards a card from their hand due to your summons or abilities, you may put Bard into the break zone. When you do so, draw 2 cards. So make your opponent discard a card, put Bard into the break zone, draw 2 cards off him, and a card off of Werei. Not bad. Flan's already played quite a bit, just because it's a great way to be able to get more cards to hand. So play Flan, immediately use his ability to search another Flan, get that to hand, play that one, use it again, search another Flan, and you know, I think there's 2 Flans that can be searched at the moment, and the other one's in Earth, so ultimately you can use it to colour fix as well if you are in Ice Earth. But ultimately you just play him onto the field, immediately make your opponent discard, draw a card. It's another way just to be able to get a bit more consistency. Remedy, I like this one, because when your opponent searches something, they have to discard a card, and when your opponent discards a card through any of your effects, Remedy then gets to search you a Sid Randall, and obviously Werei will get to draw your card as well. So basically, if you make your opponent discard a card, you get 2 cards to hand with these guys. Obviously, one of them has to be Sid Randall, and there's only 2 in the game at the moment, so you'd be, you know, limited to a max of 6. And if you're putting 6 Sid Randalls into a deck when he has no S ability. That's a bit strange. But yeah, ultimately, you get to get cards to hand, or 2 cards to hand for making your opponent discard. Nice. Sarah. When Sarah attacks, you may pay 2 ice. If you do so, your opponent discards 1 card from their hand. Now, you have to pay 2 ice, but ultimately, if you're drawing a card off of Werei, really all you're doing is converting 2 ice on your break zone, on your field, or actually it could be paid from hand as well, just for another card. So realistically, it's not the worst trade in the world. Now, obviously, Sarah's tiny, so her attack is probably just going to be blocked and she'll die immediately. But if you can attack through with her and just make it a bit harder for your opponent to block her, then you get reliably cards every turn. Finally, Suzuhisa, a 1 CP, 1000 power Earth Forward. When your opponent's auto ability triggers, put Suzuhisa into the break zone. When you do so, draw 2 cards. These effects will trigger only once per turn. So if your opponent plays, I don't know, something onto the field that has 2 auto ability triggers, you don't get 4 cards to hand, I'm afraid. But still, quite a nice card. He's very, very easily triggered because that's like 70% of all cards in this game have an auto ability, so your chances are he's going to be getting you cards to hand. So, Puck, again, I love Puck, you can tell, can't you? Yeah, Suzuhisa triggers, you get 2 cards to hand, you play Puck, bring it back on the field. Basically, just a nice way to be able to keep on getting more cards to your hand, whilst playing backups and forwards. Shinryu Celestia. So when it enters the field, you can put Suzuhisa into the break zone through its effect if you want, at which point you get to do -7k and technically -3k as well. Or you can just have Shinryu Celestia there waiting, and when Suzuhisa's effect is triggered, you get to get 2 cards off of that, but then you also get to -3k something through Shinryu Celestia as well. Zombie. So when Zombie enters the field, choose 1 forward of cost 1 in your break zone, add it to your hand. There aren't a huge amount of 1 cost forwards, but yeah, Suzuhisa is a pretty good one to get back, and just another way to keep on recurring Suzuhisa back to your hand, to keep on getting more cards to your hand, and Zombie can then be a little blocker forward if you really want him to be. It's just a nice way to be able to convert more cards into cards. But obviously you probably wouldn't be in a Wind Earth deck, but the good thing about Bards is the fact that he can search you 1 cost forwards of any element and play them onto the field, and they gain haste. Chances are it's your turn, not your opponent's turn, when he's coming onto the field through Bards, which means that Suzuhisa will be able to stick around, so there's even a potential there that Suzuhisa will actually get to deal opponent damage to your opponent, which would be hilarious, because he does gain haste from Bards, and then when it gets to your opponent's turn, regardless whether or not Suzuhisa has attacked or not, you get 2 cards to hand when they have an auto ability. Not too bad. Remedy. As I mentioned before, when your opponent searches, you get to make them discard, at which point you get to search a Sid Randall. Also, fun fact, if Remedy comes up against another Remedy, and something happens where 1 Remedy triggers to make you discard a card, the other Remedy will trigger, because then you get to search a Sid Randall to your hand. Then the other remedy will trigger because your opponent's searching for something, so then you get to make your opponent discard a card, at which point you get to search your Sid Randall, which will make the other one trigger, and yeah, just keeps on going, which is hilarious. Anyway, sorry, basically it punishes your opponent for playing something that then searches, because they search something, they have to discard, you then get a Sid Randall to hand, which will also trigger Suzuhisa, which will also get you 2 cards as well, so your opponent tries to search something, you get 3 cards, not too bad. Finally, Amaterasu. I love this. Basically, your opponent plays anything with an auto ability, you get 2 cards from it from Suzuhisa, but then you cast Amaterasu anyway to cancel that effect, so they don't even get the effect, but you get 2 cards anyway. It could even be a case that they play something onto the field with an auto ability, the ability stacks first, and then Suzuhisa stacks second. Suzuhisa will resolve first, you get 2 cards to hand, and then even if you didn't have any means of playing Amaterasu, you just have Amaterasu in hand, no open backups. Provided you get the fire to hand, you can now cast Amaterasu on that auto ability and cancel it. Just more salt in the wound, really. Cool, there we go. Drawing is one of the strongest mechanics in this game, and generally you find that any competitive deck will have an element of draw to it and is going to be one of the reasons it does so well. Consistency is so important in a reliable deck. Just it doesn't matter really how it comes about, just getting the correct cards to hand is very important. But, you know, ultimately, at the end of the day, what am I talking about? But everything I talk about is just stupid meme decks. There's not a huge amount of meta potential in here. It's just a good way to make you think about cards that don't get played very often. Some cards, you know, a lot of newer players won't see any of these cards before, and then as the, you know, fandom grows, these cards will get played even less and less because people just can't get their hands on the cards. So it can be really hard to actually try and measure how good these cards are because they get played less and less, even though they are really effective. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. I really do appreciate it. Stay safe, be lucky, and I'll see you in the next one.